So yeah, starting in 2004, I was guided to build this 1111 diamond portal for Burning Man. And starting around 2008, I've been giving presentations. And I like to give the presentations where I explain a lot of the geometry and all the background. This one is the first time now that the book is out that I want to kind of mix it up a little and start off with like a little anecdote, the preface of the book, one of my favorite aspects of all the portals, and then kind of go quickly through a lot of the information in the book until we get to the future environments, which is like the key reason, which will kind of wrap up the talk. So that's kind of an overview of what I'm going to do. I'm not exactly how long and how it's going to go, and then we'll be open for questions and answers at the end. So welcome to Portal to the New Earth. And we'll dive right in with this story. Oh, great. Oh, here it goes. I was one screen behind. No. Oh, this is not working. Oh, my God. Technical difficulties. I'm not getting the presenter view. That works. Monday night, August 27th, 2007 at Burning Man. Around 100 people have found their way out to the very edge of the playa, well over a mile away from the man, to the 111 Sapphire Portal, to experience the total lunar eclipse taking place that night. My campmates and I have just finished building it a few hours earlier, completing the very last touch by attaching blue LED lights around the top of the wall at sunset. They were not much brighter than the stars in the sky, creating a serene and dimly lit space to experience this celestial event. This was my 9th year attending the Burning Man Festival, as I started going in 1999 and attended every year since. In 2004, after 5 years of experiencing all the fantastic interactive large installations there, I was inspired to start building structures of my own. I started with the 1111 Diamond Portal, a 16-foot-high plywood structure that accommodated people within it and was vibrating with low-frequency feedback. My next project in 2006 was the 1212 Emerald Portal. One was built out of plywood and another out of steel tubing. For Burning Man 2007, I created the third and by far most ambitious of these portal installations, the 111 Sapphire Portal, a 60-foot diameter, 10-foot high sky blue wall and carpeted space that accommodate hundreds of people inside. At the center of the space were 3 nested geometries based on the evolution of the Earth's geometric form. The quasar wave transducer low-frequency feedback device that had been concealed inside of the previous portals was also filling this space with its subtly changing purring bass vibrations. I was inspired to build and share these portal installations to provide an environment that awakens the consciousness of participants to live in sacred harmony with the Earth by aligning their multidimensional energy body to the Earth's evolving energy body. By 2007, Burning Man had grown to a city of nearly 50,000 people and was attracting a diverse population from around the world. As people gathered in the 111 Sapphire Portal that Monday night, watching the Earth cast its shadow upon the moon, I had an epiphany. I came to understand that this portal was not only allowing the higher dimensional consciousness of the Earth's evolving energy body to be downloaded through interacting with the geometries, but also provided a conduit for people already holding this evolved consciousness within them to upload it into the Earth's geometric grid. I saw that it was a two-way interface for interacting with the evolving consciousness of the planet. As dawn approached on the playa the following morning, a 30-foot section of the sky blue wall was open to allow the few hardy souls that were still there to see the glowing orb of the sun crest the horizon. It shone directly into the Sapphire Portal's central geometries, illuminating them with its deep orange hues. As it rose higher in the sky, the wall section was closed again, creating the contained space for this activation of a new sacred understanding of our place on planet Earth. And even though the 111 Sapphire Portal was located on the very edge of Black Rock City, where only the intrepid few people might wander out to experience it, the subtle effects of what transpired there has rippled out to affect the world and is still reverberating. So that's what I wrote for the preface of this book, and hopefully that entices you to want to read the rest of the book. So what we're going to do now is just dive a little bit more into some of the parts that don't get covered explicitly of what it was like to walk into the Sapphire Portal. So this was a quick video snap of just coming in, and you can just see it very serene. It's barely picking up the quasar wave. It's in the background if you hear any kind of thrumming noise, but it's not very clear. You can hear an airplane passing overhead louder than that. I see people would come into yoga, very serene and meditative experience. And then as you see those central geometries, well, that center one we'll talk about a little more in the talk later, is an icosed dodecahedron. It has both 12 triangles and 12 pentagons, 20 triangles. And as you can see, they're covered with mirrors, and people get to lean against the central dodecahedron. And so the next video is a clip of actually sitting inside of there and what it looks like to look up into these mirrors that are above you, where you can see all around you these various unusual reflections of the other participants inside of the space. And it's interesting that the quasar wave is playing, it just this camera that I had did not have a good microphone to pick it up, but by leaning against that central red section, and also the blue wall had speakers contained within it. You could hear it just so subtly there. So you could see it's kind of like a very much floating in the sky experience. So in 2008, we returned with a group that held sound healings in it. And this is the beginning of me working with sound healers. There were didgeridoos, people were singing, there are bells and gongs, and it was a really powerful experience, a container for this kind of work. And the people leaning against that wall are all getting the vibrations of the quasar wave transducer. This is at Burning Man in 2007. This is actually Burning Man 2008 when it returned for its second year. There's a whole story about 2007 where I collaborated with some DJs that held dance parties, and then in 2008 I was able to invite these people, Jonah Kai and this group called Galactivation, to hold these sound healings. We did 2 at sunset and then 1 Sunday morning after the man had burned. So there were 3 of these gatherings. Okay, so as I mentioned, that central shape, the icosed dodecahedron, which we'll see in another moment, was about aligning to this concept of the Earth's energy grid. And this is just a diagram showing some researchers' conceptioning of where these ley lines and Earth energy grid lines, that they completely encompass the Earth in these geometric forms. And there are researchers that see that these geometries are what hold the consciousness frequency, and that in the shift of consciousness taking place, the geometries are evolving, and that's what that geometry in the center of that is intended to do. And then here is a sample of the quasar wave transducer, which without big bass speakers, it just comes across as a little rattling noise, but coming out of the bass speakers, this actually creates more of a vibration than a sound that you hear. So it just gives you an idea that it's subtle. It's not very loud in there. Like you go in there and you're like, is that the wind? Are you tapping into the Earth's energy? And like I had it on a timer, so it would turn on and off in various portals with different times. And when it goes off, it disappears and you notice it more than when it's on. Just like there, it went off. You're like, what? Where did that sound go? And this is one of my favorite images captured right after a big rainstorm, one of the rare ones. And I like to tell people that, I built a rainbow machine into the Sapphire portal. And so you just press the button and boom, rainbow comes out and the whole world is all just unicorns and rainbows and we live happily ever after. All right, well, that was kind of a little bit out of order because we were talking about the Earth's energy grid. So very briefly, there's a whole chapter in the book that's also very brief because you could write books and books on this concept that the ancients all over the world knew about the Earth's energy grid. And they built these megalithic structures. These are just 2 examples of dolmens, which are actually found almost on every single continent, even in North America, of megalithic, ancient, thousands of years old. The one closest to me is from an area in Russia. In Korea, there's over 30,000 of them that are dated to be over 3,000 to 4,000 years old, and they don't even know who built them and why. And then the other one is somewhere, I think, in the United Kingdom. But besides these dolmens that are, these megalithic structures, of course, we know about pyramids. Besides Egypt, the pyramids have been discovered in various other parts of the world, Mexico, and very ancient megalithic sites, and then things like Stonehenge and Avebury. These are just some of the examples of how the ancients were tuning in to the Earth's energy body and placing stones to interact with it. And this is kind of knowledge is now resurfacing at this time with the study of ley lines and the Earth energy grid. So that's just one of the components that is utilized. And even when we get to the idea of future cities, that the cities should also be placed and interact with the Earth accordingly, understanding its energetic body and nature. So now we're going to jump into the geometry part, which is a big, big part of what I talk about, and it's just got one chapter in the book. And I'm just briefly going to go through this, where this is a golden rectangle that's then inscribed with a golden spiral. The golden ratio is this basic self-referential ratio that appears all through the universe. And here's this nice diagram I found that shows it. Like in a pentagram, the shorter to the longer sections are golden ratio. But in your hand, each digit in your finger is golden ratio to the next. Your belly button divides your height in golden ratio. And then in plants and in other animals, there's all of these golden spirals, like in the pine cone and sunflowers, and even the way leaves grow on plants are all in golden ratio. It's just ubiquitous. It's a form that the universe uses to design and build everything. And it's this ratio, it's this irrational number, but 0.618 is very close to it. So 0.618 is to 1 as 1 is to 1.618. So when you're studying design, though, you see like the Parthenon is an ancient use of golden ratio, paintings have it. So I was studying and learning about the golden ratio, and I came up with this shape that I eventually employed at Burning Man in 2004 that became the diamond portal, all based on the golden ratio. So starting with a square, tapering to the golden ratio, and then centered on the golden ratio, this cylinder that pierces through this shape at golden ratio of the height. And in plan view, there's exactly 1/7. And that makes it 51.4 degrees, which is the angle of the Great Pyramid. And what was unexpected in the shape, which you're going to see at the very end of this 3D animation, is that cylinder makes a perfect heart shape. And then I chose this green color just intuitively, but green is also the color of the heart chakra. So I designed this and built this for Burning Man, 16 feet tall, in 2004. And as you can see, all those people are leaning against it, feeling the vibrations of the quasar wave, and other people, they're standing up, but often it would just be people lounging for hours on end. And it's interesting, like one story, as soon as I set it up, a guy climbed in, he says, "I love this, I'm not leaving." And I came back like 8 hours later and he was still there. And anyway, so the next year I brought a smaller golden ratio climbing steel outline structure, and I placed it between the man and the original diamond portal at the golden ratio, all on 11/11. So this is 2005. And as you can see, Burning Man is pretty wide open. If you took a picture at the same location when Burning Man's happening now, it would be filled with over 100 art pieces or more. You wouldn't even be able to see from this piece to the diamond portal because there'd be so many cars and installations and things that's completely packed. So back then it was this beautiful wide open deep playa. And in 2005, my friends, I was living in Taos, New Mexico. I brought it there, brought it back to Taos, displayed it over the winter, and then bringing it back to Burning Man, they said that they would help me bring it there, but they wouldn't help me bring it back. I had to burn it. So instead of burning it in sight, I put these wheels on, and there's a really good video on the website that shows this. We rolled it into the remains of the temple fire, which is the last big fire, group fire at Burning Man. That's kind of a solemn event. It's a temple that's dedicated to people that have passed away. It's done with not music playing or anything, and really beautiful, solemn thing. And then after it all burned down, we rolled it in, and that was the end of the original 11/11 diamond portal. Although the steel outline still goes around. Here it is at Symbiosis Gathering. I think that's a sunrise, actually. Anyway, so now we're going to dive into how the rest of these portals all transpired after building this first one, which relates a lot to the study of sacred geometry, which is, here you see this static image of the 5 platonic solids, both nested within each other and then just sitting, next to each other. But we're going to describe each one in this animation here. You start with the 4 sides triangles of a tetrahedron. And by cutting off all of the corners of a tetrahedron, it becomes an octahedron, which is 8 triangles. Cutting off all of the corners of an octahedron, when you get to the halfway point, it's going to stop at this shape that's halfway to a cube, which we're going to talk about more later. continue cutting off all the corners of the octahedron or of the cube. It goes both ways because one will make the other, but it becomes the cube. So when you cut off all the corners of either a cube or octahedron, they transform into each other. And another really interesting aspect of the relationship, well, anyway, let's keep going. You cut off the edges, because if you go back to cutting off the corners, it becomes an octahedron. So you cut the edges off of a cube, it becomes a dodecahedron. I forgot about that. That was really cool. It happened so fast. When you cut off the corners of a dodecahedron is 12 pentagons. Cut the corners off of the pentagon. Halfway, you get this shape that's halfway between it and the icosahedron. And now go all the way, it becomes the 20 triangles of an icosahedron. So those are the 5 basic Platonic solids that the Greek philosopher Plato discovered that all share the same number of faces around each vertex, and they all are made of the same equal-sided shape. So I know this is really dense, and I want to go quick to cover the really good stuff. So all of this is in the book, or this is on a YouTube video on my YouTube channel. So you can study all of this geometry at your leisure at any time and share it with your friends. So another relationship of cube and octahedron is that if you place one inside the other, all of the vertexes will touch the center point of the faces of the other. This is called duals. So a cube inside of an octahedron touches the center of each face, and vice versa. An octahedron inside of a cube touches the center of each face of the cube. So now we're going to go back to that halfway point between the cube and the octahedron, because this is a really significant shape in understanding how the universe operates. And Buckminster Fuller recognized this. But just by seeing it from the outside, it has 8 triangles and 6 squares. And you're like, well, what is so significant about it? Well, get ready, because Buckminster Fuller is going to explain it through his closest packing of spheres. You start with a single sphere of unit radius. You pack 6 more around it in a plane. Then 3 more will nest underneath and 3 more above it. So these spheres are just like oranges in the supermarket, all closest packed. You start at the center sphere, and you go out to the center of each of these 12 spheres surrounding it, and then connect each of the edges. And what you'll see is it makes that cube octahedron with this internal structure of 8 tetrahedrons all coming in, pointing together. And then the square faces are half of an octahedron. So this shape he labeled vector equilibrium, because in engineering, a vector represents energy. And when you're designing something, you have to have all of your energy vectors be canceling out so that the building won't fall down. So what's happening with this shape is the amount of energy at the center that wants this shape to explode out is completely counteracted by the amount of energy that's wrapping around that would want it to collapse. So this is how space is in perfect energetic equilibrium. This would neither want to explode out or collapse in. So if you were looking at this energy completely cancels out to 0. So this is one aspect of how the vacuum is structured. But this is not the complete answer. This is as far as Buckminster Fuller got. So anyway, here's the static diagram that's included in the book, showing these 8 tetrahedrons that come together to make this vector equilibrium, which, as you saw, was made by the closest packing of spheres connecting the centers together. Now, I didn't include this in the talk, but this can be done infinitely out in levels or layers, so that it makes an isotropic vector matrix of this 60-degree lattice. That's more than we need to cover in this talk at this time. Let's just move ahead with this cube octahedron and the cube that were used in this, in 2006, the 1212 Emerald Portal, which started with a cube, and this is the diagram in the book, that gets truncated. The bottom is cut off, and then these 3 squares cut out from the upper half that then connect below into making this platform space in the center. As you can see here, when it got built out of plywood, this was the Emerald Portal. But what isn't perfectly clear in the shape of this plywood structure, which you'll see much more clearly in the steel outline, that you could see them when they were placed next to each other in 2008. But here it is back in 2006. It was all by itself, and another part of the playa. The Emerald Portal outline shows this perfect cube octahedron that's nested in the center of this cube. But if you notice, the squares are rotated 45 degrees from the 90-degree grid of the cube. That has, and you'll see how that comes into play coming up soon. But so this was an interesting shape. It was based on this book, The Emerald Modem, that talked about the green cube being the totality of the Earth's vibrational energy body, but also within each of our heart chakras. And like I say, that's in the book, so just want to tease you with this information and keep moving ahead with the geometry. So here we have a cube, and you cross all of the faces of a cube. And so that makes these two tetrahedrons interpenetrating each other, but it has a central octahedron, and it's 8 tetrahedrons that are pointing out from the center. Now this shape is also known in the New Age community as a Merkaba, which is a Hebrew word for light body vehicle. And so this is an important shape in our relating to our spiritual energetic form, the star tetrahedron or Merkaba. So not going into too much more detail, there's lots you could study and read whole books just on that alone. So here is these two shapes that we just learned about. The vector equilibrium, 8 tetrahedrons pointing in, star tetrahedron, 8 tetrahedrons pointing out. And what the physicist Nassim Haramein discovered is that when you combine these two shapes into one, it makes a 64 tetrahedron grid. So you could see the white star tetrahedron and the black cube octahedron or vector equilibrium as the surface of it. But we're going to see the whole entire internal structure of this in just a moment. But the first important part to understand about this 64 tetrahedron grid or structure of the vacuum, as the physicist Nassim Haramein calls it, is that it's comprised of 8 smaller star tetrahedron that are all radially connected. So as you see, you just take 8 smaller star tetrahedrons, and they then make this complete shape that has both the star tetrahedron and the cube octahedron in it. And here's the graphic that's in the book showing that relationship of 8 star tetrahedron all radially connected. And instead of showing you the graphic from the book, I'm going to show you the photograph of the model that I made that's here on display in the room of a 64 tetrahedron grid. And it's painted in a way that you can clearly see the outer yellow cube octahedron or vector equilibrium along with the red and orange star tetrahedron. And then at the very center, you can see a light blue cube octahedron that's concentrically nested like onion skin layers inside of it. So this shape is a combination of radially touching star tetrahedrons and concentrically nested cube octahedrons. The radially connected one are the 8 tetrahedron that all point out. The concentrically nested ones are the 8 tetrahedrons all pointing in. So these basically represent the expanding forces of the universe and the contracting forces of the universe, all in perfect energetic equilibrium. So this shape is completely basically canceled out. So the understanding is that the universe is made of energy. And the energy is nearly infinite, but it's all in perfect vacuum form, which is this shape. And one of my favorite corollaries to this is that there's this Tibetan heart sutra that starts off by saying, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. This is the structure of the vacuum, or maybe it's the form of the emptiness. So by understanding this relationship, this very basically simple geometric form is a way to understand the energetic nature of all time and space. Another interesting aspect is 64 tetrahedrons. Chinese divination has a thing called the I Ching or I Ching, which is 64 hexagrams. A hexagram is made of 6 lines. Each tetrahedron is made of 6 lines. So there's a one-to-one correspondence between the 64 tetrahedrons in this form and the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which basically can divine everything and anything that will ever happen in all of time and space. Another interesting aspect of this shape is that it's fractal. If you were to half each of the struts in the center, it would make an identical half-size version of this 64 tetrahedron grid. If you double all of the struts, it'll make a double-size 64 tetrahedron grid. And you could do that infinitely. You can half it or double it conceptually infinitely, and it always remains the same relationship. So, pretty cool. And that's, this is as deep into geometry as we're going, although there's a couple of more that we're going to touch on now that we left behind. The relationship of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. Earlier on, you saw that if you cut off all of the corners, they'll make each other. Well, again, like the cube and the octahedron, they're duals of each other. They nest inside of each other where the vertexes of each one will touch the center face of the other. And as we saw earlier in those transformations, if you cut off the corners of either the icosahedron or dodecahedron, it becomes this 20 triangle, 12 pentagon shape called an icosahedodecahedron. And that's relevant because that's the shape that I learned about through this book, The Emerald Modem, that the author Richard Levitan was talking about the Earth's vibrational energy body evolving to at this time. So that's what was used in the center of the sapphire portal, this icosahedodecahedron, which here you see was at Burning Man 2007 and 8. And here's a diagram showing, starting with the complete shapes, a dodecahedron in the center, an icosahedodecahedron, and then icosahedron all concentrically nested, cutting it in half, removing out the pentagons of the icosahedodecahedron to just leave those triangles for the mirrors, and that's what you could see the diagram at the bottom there is exactly what was built, that was placed in the center of this 60-foot diameter, 10-foot high sky blue wall that only had this one little 5-foot entrance facing east. You ducked down and you went inside, and it created this shade for people to sit and enjoy it in the daytime. It was a great place to hang out at night. And whoops, I went too fast. I just wanted to show it did get pretty crowded at times, besides those sound healings. You just come out there. I know a lot of the photos showed it relatively empty, which would happen also, but they were really busy. People did come out and find it. Okay, so now we're going to look at how the next portal after the sapphire portal was made. This is it's taking a dodecahedron and stellating each of the faces into 5-sided pyramids makes a stellated dodecahedron. And then as you see, though, a stellated dodecahedron, you connect its points together, it makes an icosahedron. So it's another interesting relationship between, you start with a dodecahedron, put these 5-sided pyramids on each face that makes a stellated dodecahedron, and that will fit perfectly inside of an icosahedron. So we used this form in 2009, and we moved to 222, and because the first two portals were green heart chakra color, and then the sky blue is throat chakra, working with a friend of mine, Casey Greenling, he was like, the next one can evolve to being the indigo of the third eye. And so we starting with the stellated dodecahedron, I cut the bottom point off, I cut openings around the side of it to access the interior, and then I made the interior the original green of the diamond portal, so it connected from the third eye back to the heart chakra. And as you can see, besides it holding a lot of people inside, people would lean on the outside to get the vibrations of the quasar wave that was hidden below the floor. There you could see the subtle lighting, just little indigo lights on the tips and little chartreuse green ones shining inside. And so this was brought to another festival, Lightning in a Bottle, where I hosted sound healing ceremonies inside. And as you could see, upwards of 20 people could actually squeeze into the center area. And this is actually the portal that is now here, except for it's been painted turquoise and it has an indigo interior. Okay, so now we're going to get to the end of this geometry, which I'm sure is overloading your brains. Let me go back and start with this shape here. That's a rhombic triacontahedron. Let me see, can I pause it? No, I would jump ahead. Okay, there it is paused. So I only learned about this shape in 2010 when I was watching a video by Drunvalo Melchizedek called Birth of a New Humanity. And it was through his research that he said the Earth's energy body is evolving to this rhombic triacontahedron, which is 30 rhombic faces polyhedron. And I actually it took a while to find out that the research he related it to was something I had already read about, but I didn't know the name of the shape. But this team, Beckers and Huygens, developed an Earth grid back, I think, in the 70s or 80s and published it widely, and it's based on this rhombic triacontahedron geometry. But you'll see that Richard Levitan wasn't too far off in saying that it was evolving to the icosahedodecahedron, because we're going to watch. Let's see, here we go. Let's start this. So when you cross the diagonals of a rhombic triacontahedron the long way, it makes a perfect icosahedron. Then when you cross the diagonals of each face, the short diagonal, it makes the dodecahedron. And what's very interesting is that those ratios of the long to short is exactly golden ratio. So it's a golden ratio dodecahedron, icosahedron. So there they both are. You'll see them interpenetrating each other for just a moment. And then the next step between these two, though, is that you connect the intersections where they cross of the icosahedron and dodecahedron. And that's where you see this relationship to the icosahedodecahedron. So all three of these shapes are perfectly encapsulated in that rhombic triacontahedron. So when you see just a rhombic triacontahedron, you can understand that it's containing all three, golden ratio, dodecahedron, icosahedron, and that icosahedodecahedron. Pretty cool. So that's the graphic I have for it. For the book, this is how it's explained. So you can study it slowly and carefully, seeing those diagonals of each and how they all add up to those three shapes that are found within it. So I thought, wow, that's a really cool shape. And since my work is about relating to this evolution of the Earth's energy body, and then I was guided to make it turquoise because in the colors of the chakras, turquoise is going between the green of the heart chakra and blue of the throat chakra. And I just felt like being bathed in this higher heart chakra that's being activated at this time. So I actually made 2 of these turquoise portals in 2012. And the first one was made in Australia for several events in the winter of January, February 2012. And you see that one is on the one side where I took 6 panels out, and on the other side, 5 panels were removed for the one I built here in the United States. So here we are at the Rainbow Serpent Festival, this January 2012, with the first of the turquoise portals. And here we are. I came back to the US and built this version to bring to this, it was called the Pyramid Lake Eclipse Festival in April of 2012. Here it is at Beloved Festival later that summer, and you can see the interior of the panels has the cross diagonals. So the icosahedron and dodecahedron that's contained in this shape are easily seen when you're sitting on the inside. And of course it made it to Burning Man 2012, and here's another shot showing the inside of that space. So then, that was 2012 Burning Man. 2013, I brought that and several others back for a little retrospective. And then starting in 2014, I came up for an idea of something like the Sapphire Portal, but instead of sky-colored, earthen-colored. So I was just going to build this earth, like playa-colored wall and just have it be there as a little sanctuary. And I was introduced to a group from Texas that was already building and bringing a piece to the playa that was exactly aligned with the work that I do, called the Pachamama Portal. I kid you not, they had portal in the name, just like all my portals. And the Pachamama Portal consisted of this giant inflatable earth globe that was perfect satellite imagery sitting on top of this dodecahedron that contained all different sound healing instruments built into it, drums, strings, didgeridoos, and it was all connected to a big orgonite ring that grounded into the ground. And then they built all of these lotus petal hammocks just for people to sit back and relax and experience the other people playing it. And at nighttime, the globe was lit up perfectly, and when you laid on those hammocks and looked at that globe against the sky above it, it actually looked like you were in orbit around the Earth, floating above the Earth and looking down at it. It was quite a cool experience. And of course, I had the quasar wave transducer mounted in the wall of that, so it was vibrating with that. So that wall came back the next year in 2015, where I collaborated with another playa artist that I'd known for many years that makes these paper mache installations. So on the outside are these spiraling bougainvillea vines, and it's basically just inferring like the DNA and spiral of energies in nature. And as you enter, there's these 2 blue aliens that greet you, and then there's this flame being that's conducting a marriage between these 2 other green beings that represent the goddess Sekhmet and the god Ptah of the Egyptian cosmology. And basically, there's the god of creation and the goddess of destruction, and they're being married. So it's this unification of duality that's taking place, and it was called the Reformation Portal. And then the rest of the space was filled with these green and purple cats that were looming over you. And in the Kathy D'Onofrio, the artist that created them, they were representative of the burghers of Calais, who were the wealthy people that ran this town during the 100-Year War that was being invaded. And the invaders captured or said to the people of the town that, give yourselves up. And when they gave themselves up to save the town, their life was spared and the town was spared. And it's like this analogy of how the wealthy rulers of the planet, who are like these looming negative beings, can actually surrender to the higher forces and reform so that we may all live in peace and harmony. So the wall returned to Burning Man in 2016. In very simple, I put the diamond portal, as you see it, lined up perfectly with the entrance. And then we just made these very simple stations of the chakras. And it was very peaceful, meditative space. And this is when I finally moved all of my portal installations. I wasn't saying specifically, but you saw the Pachamama portal was at 11:44, and then the Reformation portal was 11:55, which is almost at 12 o'clock, at the deepest point on the playa. And for 2016, I brought the Alcyon portal and placed it all the way on the side at 1:44, which is where I've been working at Burning Man in the last few years. So anyway, this piece is now, here it is in my backyard. So if anyone wants to come and experience it, I host events there sporadically. Equinoxes and solstices are usual, and other things like that. Which brings us up to the opening that we had today, which was my final portal so far for Burning Man. I didn't even put 2022, the 144 Interdimensional Space-Time Portal, which was actually designed in collaboration with the South African intuitive Maria that came up with the concept of the 12-step pyramid and these arches, which represent complete rings facing north and south, east, west, and sitting on a horizontal ring. And here's a picture from Burning Man of Maria conducting one of her sunrise ceremonies. We did ceremonies every sunrise and sunset, and she's leading a meditation and also chanting these light languages, which you can actually hear in the installation here at the retreat center on recording, ever so subtly. And of course, it's there's a speaker mounted at the top of the ring, so people sitting on the pyramid can hear it. And then inside of the space is another speaker, and there's these backrests. You can sit inside. The walls are covered with the latest James Webb Telescope deep space photograph that came out last summer, and the ceiling is this pyramid, face of an Egyptian pyramid that's now been turned inside out, and it's backlit at night. So it's really quite a wonderful effect inside. It's very subtly lit and glowing stones making this Egyptian pyramid on the inside. And the outside, once we get this all sorted out here, will be lit up, all those light language symbols that Maria channeled for this piece. And of course, the whole overall intention and description is described in the book, but just generally, the concept is that this is to align timelines for the best possible outcome for humanity. So we're working with the energies that are taking place here on the planet and working with higher dimensional beings in creating this structure, and it's available for people to both interact with and experience. And so it's really wonderful. I'm grateful and honored to have been working with her. So we do have some little pendants of that, and there's some little pendants of the various other portals. That's the Alcyon portal and some of the other portals. So I make these pendants for the most part to give out as gifts. Burning Man's a gift like economy, and people just have things that they're giving you, but I do also give them for donations to help support this. So I can see already we've been going for quite a while, and I'm only now just getting to the real point and best part of this whole talk. So, well, it'll be just a few more minutes, and we'll get through it though. So, why I do all of this work is because my main interest is in creating future environments that are in harmony with nature, that we can live not with detriment to the earth, but actually to benefit humans and all lives. So it all starts with me picking up this book, Buckminster Fuller's Synergetics, Explorations in the Geometry of Thinking. And he coined the word synergy, which means the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. And synergetic geometry embraces all the qualities of experience, all aspects of being. It involves geometric modeling, exploring interrelationships in the fact of experience and the process of thinking. Synergetics endeavors to identify and understand the methods that nature actually uses in coordinating universe, both physically and metaphysically. Now, this is from his book, and that's the way he writes, and that's actually one of the more simple sentences. It's a very dense book, very difficult to understand into reading, but it's extremely inspiring, and he goes into I've only scratched the surface of it. It's such a powerfully in-depth understanding of three-dimensional space. But let's just stick to the basics of what he was really about. One of his most famous quotes, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's been the focus of my life. I'm not an activist telling them to stop doing this and stop doing that. I just want to come up with the new visions, and if we could all do that, all those things that we need to stop will just go away. And then here he is sitting with his most famous invention, although he did invent it independently. There was a geodesic dome built in Germany in the 20s by another architect that is explained in the book briefly, but it was never popularized until Buckminster Fuller discovered it, invented it, and became a big part of his career. And also he proposed that a design science revolution is the application of our highest technological capabilities to enable all humanity to live sustainably at an unprecedentedly higher standard of living than has ever been experienced by any. And it can be accomplished while phasing out future use of fossil fuels and atomic energy and living entirely on sun-derived energy. He's most famous also for this huge geodesic dome that was built for the Montreal Expo 67. And of course, here's another one of his great quotes that's similar to the last one. It's now highly feasible to take care of everybody on Earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. It's a matter of converting the high technology from weaponry to livingry. And I mean, could you imagine if we took just the US budget for our military and turned it towards making a sustainable environment for everyone on the planet? It could be done just like that. But there's deeper reasons why that's not happening. It's not because we can do it, and that's what I try to address in my portals, is this evolution of consciousness. So anyway, Buckminster Fuller really set me on my life's path. Shortly thereafter, I came across this drawing in a New York gallery, and what you're seeing here is just a section of a long scroll drawing that wrapped around the whole gallery, and it was these visions of these future environments that were three-dimensionally integrated ecological cities called arcologies by this Italian architect Paolo Soleri, who was actually a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's. And he was settled out here in Arizona, where he first built his Cosanti Foundation in Scottsdale, and then starting in 1970, he started to build his own version of this arcology, Arcosanti. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. He first published this book in 1969, which detailed the concept of arcology, subtitled The City and Image of Man. The definition of arcology is in nature, as an organism evolves, it increases in complexity and also becomes a more compact or miniaturized system. Similarly, a city should function as a living system. Arcology, architecture and ecology as one integral process, is capable of demonstrating positive response to the many problems of urban civilization by recognizing the necessity of the radical reorganization of the sprawling two-dimensional urban landscape into dense, integrated three-dimensional cities in order to support the complex activities that sustain human culture. So that's the cover of the book. And then the book is divided in two halves. The first half are these flow diagrams, and under the flow diagrams are these detailed explanations of what they're showing. And then the second half is page after page of these kind of just sketches of these visionary cities that are miles across and maybe half a mile high. There's a little Empire State Building on each page to give it scale. And the Empire State Building is a little more than 1,000 feet tall, to get the idea of these. But instead of it being one single building, it's an integrated three-dimensional ecologically integrated megastructure. So this is what he's been building out in Arizona since 1970, and it never really took off. There's never been more than 100 or so people living in it, but they do hold events, and they're still there making his different bells, which they're most famous for. And this was an event I was at back in 2017 in the amphitheater, just to show like the urban integration. Those are each individual townhouses that are all ringing around this public amphitheater space. So the fact that it exists is notable, and I'm really inspired by his concepts. So, and by being inspired by both of these, I finally went back to art school, Parsons School of Design, for environmental design, where I decided to study future environments. And one of the biggest discoveries I made that wasn't easy to come by back then, and even now not that much talked about, but this is actually a cover of a book that was reissued in 2004. But mind you, I was studying in the mid-'80s, and it was extremely difficult to learn about this German expressionist architect, Bruno Taut, that published a book in 1917, right after World War I, called Alpine Architecture. But as you see on the cover, it shows like like this atom-like space city, and these other cities inside are like crystal cities on mountaintops. Here's some black and white cities that show a crystal city on a mountaintop, and then in a canyon with water flowing through it. And here's this other crystal city, and he says, engage the masses in a great task which fulfills everybody, from the humblest to the foremost. Each sees in the great communality clearly the work of his own hands. Each builds in a true sense. And he had this whole spiritual view that humans were spiritual organs of the earth to build and beautify the earth in this harmony. Anyway, very interesting book that's still, inspired me greatly with this vision. Here in 1959, that's the year I was born, William Catavalis, who was teaching at Pratt, came up with an idea for organic architecture that could grow like living organisms. But what was really inspiring was learning about our esteemed local resident Glenn Small's work that was developed all through the mid-60s into the 70s, this first vertical city and then the biomorphic biosphere megastructure. So it's hard to understand exactly what you're looking at here, but they're like 1,000-foot tall tensile structures that have these homes that can move about it, that are all very much like integrated living organisms. And you can go, there's a YouTube video where I interview him in detail. So if you really want to learn about it, I highly recommend going to the Portal to the New Earth YouTube channel and watching that video that goes into very explicit detail on this concept of this incredible ecologically integrated megastructure city. And Glenn, let's see, we have a quote for it. It's more than a city. It's an environmentally friendly utopia. The living, breathing structure is close to an actual organism. It minimizes the taxation on natural resources, reuses, recycles, collects rainwater, grows food, and uses direct natural energy. The estimated population of 11 million would reside in individual modules that, like in the vertical city, would be mobile and flexible so that residents could easily move through the stratification of the climate, from alpine to tropical. I mean, this is supposed to be at least a mile high so that you would actually have different climates in it. And he did get close to actually building a very rudimentary version of it, which was called the Green Machine in Venice Beach, where he's also the founder of SCI-ARC, Southern California Institute of Architecture. And this is a rendering of like this basic structure that could then have like airstreams or airstream-like light mobile dwellings that could plug into this space frame network that's integrated with all the greenery. So, and something like this is still a viable concept, especially with the craze in tiny homes. If you build a structure like this that people could bring tiny homes to, just plug them in and pull them out, and you have this three-dimensional ecological little community space. So this brings us to another project. While I was studying at Parsons, the head of the department was James Wines, and this is one of his most famous conceptual pieces. The idea was to take an urban steel high-rise building and then fill it with suburban homes, called the high-rise of homes. And this piece has been on display in many museums around the world, and there's actually an exhibit coming up at MoMA that's going to feature both James and Glenn Small in it later this year, September of 2023. And that brings us to this re-envisioning of New York City by this Professor Mitchell Joachim, who I also just interviewed on the YouTube channel. And this is called the post-carbon city state, where you see like a stream flowing down the middle of the street with wetlands, easily accessible mass transit. The walls of the building are all covered in green. Just a way that what we could do with what we already have and try to shift it to our vision of integrating nature into cities. This is a concept by the Belgian architect Vincent Calabet of these towers, also spiraling and integrated with green. And he also had a concept for rebuilding all of the bridges in Mosul, Iraq. And these are built out of a module that could be 3D printed and then integrated with the water and the trees and all of that. It's just an incredible vision of how we could be building urban spaces that satisfy all of these integration of ecology. So I've been thinking about these ideas of arcology a long time, and I came up with a concept called the 12 Spiral City. And it was partly inspired by this concept by architect Anne Griswold Ting with this thing called the urban spiral hierarchy. And you could see it's these roads that are all spiraling kind of almost randomly with little houses on each of the levels. So I really like this idea, but I felt like the geometry could be a little more organized in this concept that I learned about from the author John Michel in a book called Dimensions of Paradise. And it's a diagram that he basically discovered, he didn't invent, but it's been around, and it's called the New Jerusalem or Heavenly City. And this is kind of a diagram showing how it's generated of these 12 circles around a central one, and another diagram of this relationship, this sacred geometry of the Heavenly City or New Jerusalem. And all of these proportions have very deep significance, which he goes into detail explaining why there are their sizes and angles. But I just took this geometry of the Heavenly City, superimposed these spiraling ramps that Anne Griswold Ting described into this, and this is a little paper model that's showing how the levels would spiral up, and a cross-section showing how human-scale buildings, and just a year or so ago I had a friend 3D model this, to show the spiraling ramps where the intersect are central towers that connect each of the spirals that would have elevators that would bring the human scale, like golf cart vehicles or bicycles or scooters, up to each level. And then each of the spiral ramps have 3 streets, an inner, outer, and central street. And the buildings themselves are just human scale. And as you can see, it grows over time to a total of 12 levels. Each level is 144 feet high with just 45-foot buildings, leaving 100 feet of airspace in between each level. And it would just be grown. Now, mind you, all of these depictions that I have is what we could do with the technology that my friend had accessible. It wouldn't be these square rectangular buildings. It wouldn't be all these hard edges. This is just to show the concept of the form. And this is something I found recently that more embodies what the entire city would look like. It would grow and be developed as like a living organism, but that's the framework and the form of it. So this is an idea I've been kicking around, and it's explained and detailed in the book. And this brings us to the very last chapter of the book, this concept of taking a step back, not having to build a giant megastructure city, but how do we just interact with the earth to build our villages in the most conscious and life-enhancing way. And so this concept is called terra aquaforming, which humans actually have been doing forever. This is ancient rice paddies in Asia, where they take completely steep, inaccessible terrain, turn it into all of these rice paddies, and are able to grow food like that. And then, of course, we've been damming and making lakes all over the place, but here's an example of a lake, a man-made reservoir that's been created where the edge of the lake has the huge amount of surface area and human habitations are integrated into it. Admittedly, this is still more in the 3D way of thinking, but as we progress, we'll be able to create these environments where the water and the land are integrated and all the homes are integrated. This is interesting in the Netherlands, where they have a lot of canals. There's a fort that was built years ago but has been turned into this habitation with the houses, and you see the integration of water and land. And in the Netherlands, again, is this little village of Giethoorn that has no roads for cars. There's only pathways for people to walk or bike and little canals to take boats through the village. And this is a pretty well-known intentional community, Temera, that's in Portugal. And as you see, that's a big lake that's been integrated as part of their community. Let's see. And this is just another example I found where the water is integrated in a way that if it starts to flow more, it'll create a river. And then when the flow reduces, it turns into these ponds. And you have these swales that connect the flow of the water when it's at higher levels so that it gets integrated into the land. And this was a really wonderful example of a little farm in Fermaduc, France, where you see, besides the greenhouses and the houses and the gardens, right central to the whole thing is this little network of ponds that integrate into the central gardens. And we end this whole concept with this depiction from Plato's description of Atlantis. And Plato described Atlantis as concentric rings of land and water. And so I think it's really important that as we develop future environments, that we remain conscious of course, land, water, and all of the elements, that integrating the 5 elements into how we develop our land in the most conscious and spiritual way. So thank you so much, and of course be open to questions. I know I covered a lot of information, and I did it all in under an hour.